So welcome, Facebook viewers. My name is Brad Bodis, and this is the Bond and Bodis Law Office's weekly Facebook Live. This week, we are talking specifically about the end of the eviction moratorium that we are seeing in the states that we serve, in Alabama and in Mississippi. Many of you are aware that for the last year and a half or so, there has been a moratorium on evictions. The most recent moratorium was put into place by the CDC. And just a couple of weeks ago, the United States Supreme Court issued a decision saying that the CDC did not have authority to issue a prohibition, moratorium on evictions. So evictions have started up. We expect to see them in larger and larger numbers in both Alabama and Mississippi. In last week's episode, we talked specifically about the eviction process in Alabama. So if you are viewing this and you live or are renting in Alabama, I encourage you to go back to last week's Bond and Bodis Facebook Live episode, in which we had as a guest Holly Ray. Holly Ray is with Legal Services of Alabama. In fact, she manages the Huntsville office and really had quite a bit of helpful information on the eviction process in Alabama. This week, we're fortunate to have my good friend and law partner, Ed Woods. Ed is the managing attorney for all of the Bond and Bodis law offices in Mississippi, and he also serves as a justice court judge in Mississippi and has for a long time. So Ed will offer us some specific insight into how the eviction process goes forward and how it is carried out in Mississippi. Before we get started, I want to remind our viewers that the Bond and Bodis law offices are located throughout Alabama and Mississippi. We help people with money problems, and we have been for over 30 years. Our attorneys are very experienced, and at this point, we are offering absolutely free initial consultations. So if you're facing an issue with an eviction, or if you're facing really any kind of financial concerns right now, and we know a lot of you after this past year and a half are struggling financially, we encourage you, reach out. The initial consultations with our attorneys are absolutely free. We're doing them right now virtually if you choose. We'll do them from the comfort, safety of your own home or your own office. We just really want to make sure that you're informed and you know what your rights are. And that's why we're talking specifically about the eviction procedures in Mississippi today, and we did it with Alabama last week. I encourage our viewers, eviction may not impact you directly, money problems may not impact you directly, but if you know somebody with financial problems, if you know somebody that is renting and may be behind on their rent and may be facing the eviction, please share these episodes with them. We are providing the best information we can as to how the process works and how to protect yourself if you find yourself in a situation where you can't pay your bills right now. So back to today's episode. Again, I feel very fortunate to have my good friend, my law partner of many years, and just a great guy, Ed Woods. Ed is a Mississippi native, has practiced law in Mississippi for many years, has served on the bench at Justice Court in Mississippi for many years. He is a husband, he is a father, and he's a great friend. Ed, I'm sure I'm leaving out some important information about your background. Why don't you share with our viewers a little bit about Ed Woods?
Well, you did a great job, Brad. I've been practicing law here in Mississippi for a little over 30 years, and for all of that time, most of it has been geared toward, and in the last half of that time, probably all of it has been geared towards trying to help our clients, folks that come to see us, deal with overwhelming amounts of debt and get them back on a good track. So I've done that and continuously, and I have also been, gosh, it's coming up on 20 years now since I first got elected to serve. I've been elected, reelected 4 times, so I guess maybe I'm doing something right for the folks in the community. So I've had that perspective too, and I'll tell you, it's very interesting to see, especially when we talk about today's topic, evictions, to kind of see it through those different lenses. It's one way we always look at it one way as an advocate for our clients, right. But to see it from, I guess, the bench side or from the judicial or judge's point of view is really helpful. My wife tells me that, wearing 2 hats makes me more rounded. So maybe she's right about that. But
I've become more rounded, but I think it's more in a physical type way as I get older rather than a.
Well, if she keeps feeding me like she does, I'm probably going to be right there. So, yeah.
Well, you have a wonderful wife, Renita, is also a dear friend. So, Ed, let's start with just a little bit of an overview of what role a justice court judge serves. What does the justice court do in Mississippi?
Well, justice court really is kind of a broad spectrum type court. It's provided for in our state constitution, unlike some of the other courts that we have in Mississippi. And essentially, we have criminal jurisdiction in misdemeanor type matters, traffic tickets, simple assault, things like that. So there's jurisdiction for a justice court judge to hear that. And then where the evictions come in is on the civil side of that jurisdiction. Justice court in Mississippi is a small claims court. That means that you can sue and recover money if you're a debt collector, for example, up to $3,500 total. If it's more than $3,500 you're seeking, you have to go to a higher court. But justice court, there are 82 counties in Mississippi. There's 197 justice court judges staffing those 82 county courts. And I would probably say that 90% plus of the evictions, residential type evictions in Mississippi, are going to be initiated in justice court. So we see a lot of that.
Well, for our viewers, we obviously at Bond and Botus represent people with financial problems. Often we represent tenants, people that may be having a hard time paying their rent. But we also represent a lot of small business owners, and we realize that when a tenant is unable to pay their rent, it also impacts the landlord and can create financial concerns for the landlord. And we're going to talk about the eviction process and some of the relief available today from both ends, because we want people to understand the issue fully. Again, last week, we focused on the eviction process in Alabama. So if you are a viewer in Alabama, I think you'll find today's information interesting, but to supplement it, you should also go back to last week's episode with Holly Ray, which is available either on our Facebook page or on our website. I encourage you to do that. Ed, today we're going to talk about the eviction process in Mississippi, and I want to kind of hit with a broad stroke first, and then for our viewers' information, we're going to have some time for question and answer by Ed. So if you have questions about eviction procedure, please post it, and we'll try to get to it at the end of this broadcast. Ed, let's start by, if you would, just give us kind of a broad overview of how the eviction process works in Mississippi.
Well, it starts with a tenant, an individual who is renting a residence. Perhaps it's an apartment, maybe it's a house, maybe it's a mobile home, but the person who is in that is the tenant. The person to whom rent paid is the landlord. So in Mississippi, when a tenant gets behind on their rent obligation, the law is pretty favorable to the landlords, because essentially all the landlord really has to do when that landlord is seeking an eviction for non-payment of rent, as opposed to seeking an eviction for other reasons, like perhaps criminal activity or destroying the property or something like that. Those are other reasons that could lead to an eviction in Mississippi. But I would say the vast majority of evictions that come into justice court are just simply going to be the landlord coming to court saying, hey, the tenant's not paying his or her rent, and we want them out. Now, what the law requires in Mississippi is that the tenant simply give notice, and very frequently they'll just post a letter on the door of the residence and say,
you said the tenant, but you meant the landlord, correct? Has to give the notice?
yes, I'm sorry.
Okay,
yes,
that's all right.
Yes, the landlord is required to give the tenant notice, but it's only a 3-day notice. And so a lot of times the landlord will post a notice on the door of the residence of the tenant, and it'll say, hey, your rent's $500 a month. You're a couple months behind. We're gonna seek to have you evicted. If the tenant and landlord don't work it out from there, then all really the law in Mississippi requires the landlord to do is to come to justice court. The court clerk's office has the forms. It's essentially a form affidavit or sworn statement. Landlord fills it out with the numbers, attaches a copy of what was posted on the door of the tenant's door, and then that starts the lawsuit, the eviction lawsuit. Now, Mississippi law requires, like every other state, because there are constitutional questions here, but the tenant has to be given a proper notice that the landlord is seeking the eviction, and that's through a service of the copy of the affidavit on the tenant. That's usually done by constables in Mississippi. We have constables in each county. It's a summons, and the summons typically will have a date and time for the tenant to show up in court and essentially show cause why they shouldn't be evicted. So that's the process starts.
Okay, so I want to clarify there. So in Alabama, we learned last week that once the tenant was served with a summons, they had a limited period of time to file an answer, and only if they filed an answer was a court hearing scheduled. Do I understand you to say that the court hearing is scheduled automatically in Mississippi?
Yes. And like Alabama, Mississippi has a 5-day period. You've got 5 days after you've been served with process to file a response. But we do not in Mississippi. I feel pretty comfortable saying this for all the counties, and I can say it certainly for my county. Mm-hmm. I never issue an order of eviction until obviously the complaint, the affidavit has been filed. I'm satisfied that the tenant has received a proper notice of the proceedings, and then that's placed on on the court's docket, and then on the date and time in the summons, the case is called. If the tenant is present, they have an opportunity to defend themselves. If they're not present and everything else appears to be in order, only then will an eviction issue.
Will the landlord have to be present in person to testify, or is their attorney appearing sufficient?
Both ways, but most of the time in Mississippi, you generally have either the landlord, if it's a mom and pop type thing, or if it's a more, I guess you might say, professional landlord, maybe a management company or something, then generally the business manager for the local office there will be the witness who will testify. But we have a rule in our Mississippi justice courts that basically says if you're the plaintiff, in other words, if you're the landlord and you kicked all of this off and filed and you don't show up as noticed, show up for the hearing, the rules allow us judges to dismiss that affidavit, and then they essentially have to start over. So they're going to be there.
Okay, got it. So then the court hearing is held. Unfortunately, the tenant has a judgment of eviction entered against them. What happens next?
So after that, Mississippi law provides for a process called a warrant of removal. It's kind of on the same par with a garnishment or something like that, and that's just a warrant from the court that says, okay, eviction order has been signed. The warrant issues to the local constable, and the constable goes out to execute the warrant, which is essentially to deliver it on the tenant and say, okay, the judge has said that you have to leave, you have to vacate the premises. So, please, get your personal property and vacate the premises. Now, tenants do still have some rights there. Even afterwards, they can take an appeal. But, there's really the law in Mississippi does not recognize any legal defense, any excuse, if you will, for non-payment of rent. So you've either paid the rent or you haven't. So I rarely see a tenant after the judgment of eviction, but before the warrant of removal is issued, which is usually within a couple of days. Rarely do you see a tenant coming back in trying to assert their rights at that point. But they certainly could, tender the rent to the landlord, and sometimes that'll happen. And then the warrant will never be executed because the tenant has gone to the landlord and said, look, I know you got this judgment against me, but it wasn't working or whatever. Here's the updated rent, or here's the rent that you owe.
So if the warrant issues, and you said the sheriff goes out and you need to move out, court order's been entered, and the tenant still doesn't move out, at what point is the personal property actually moved out of the residence?
Well, that's a great question, and that has been a raging debate among the justice court judges and constables ever since day one for me. Some people interpret that warrant to mean that the constable actually, assists the landlord in recovering possession by getting the chairs and pots and pans out. I do not believe that's a proper reading of the law. I think the constable has the constable is essentially there as a peace officer to allow the landlord to peaceably recover possession of the premises, and the tenant, the person who's having to move out, is certainly entitled to take their personal property with them. That's not part of what the landlord would get. The landlord just gets possession of the property.
Right, so one more question on the actual justice court procedure. I understood you to say earlier that justice court is a small claims court, has jurisdiction up to a certain dollar amount. Now, does justice court have exclusive jurisdiction over evictions? Or I'm sure we're going to have a lot of tenants post-COVID. They're going to have a substantial amount of back rent, well and above of $3,500. Is it still a justice court matter at that point?
It is not. If a landlord wants, or if the past due amount exceeds $3,500, then the landlord will have to go to either a county court. Now, we have 82 counties in Mississippi, but only 19 of those counties have a county court. That's kind of a court between the justice court level and our general courts of trial jurisdiction, which we call circuit courts in Mississippi. So when that amount is exceeded, then the landlord needs to go to either county court or to circuit court in his or her county if there's no county court in that county. And that's where the process is going to be different there, because the Mississippi rules of civil procedure govern the proceedings in the county courts and the circuit courts in Mississippi. But in justice court, we're still largely a creature of statute, and we have a very abbreviated set of procedural rules.
But most evictions are going to take place in justice court in Mississippi.
That's correct. I'd be shocked if less than 95% of them were in a court other than justice court.
Okay. So just to recap here, the landlord has to give the tenant 3-day notice, essentially an opportunity to cure, and then the complaint can be filed in justice court to initiate the eviction proceeding. Once the tenant is served, the tenant has 5 days to respond, and then an evidentiary hearing is conducted, at which often the issue is whether or not the tenant is behind on their rent, and if the tenant is behind, a order of eviction is going to be entered by the court.
That's right.
Now, for my clients, for our clients' tenants, you should know that the eviction process can be stayed through a bankruptcy filing up until that judgment of eviction is entered. So if you're behind on your rent and you get this initial 3-day notice from your landlord, or even after you're served with the summons, up until that court hearing when the court actually enters the judgment, if you seek bankruptcy protection, that process is going to be stayed and is going to buy you at least another month, if not longer than that. And there are a variety of different types of bankruptcy. Often a Chapter 13 reorganization type bankruptcy is going to be utilized in this type process. But if you're in this situation, again, I encourage you to reach out. Our offices throughout Mississippi and Alabama are offering absolutely free initial consultations right now. We'll do them by phone. We'll do them from the comfort of your own home. So, it's free and it's easy. You need to know your rights. Please reach out for help. All right. So, Ed, I know that during the eviction moratorium, before the Supreme Court issued this opinion, the moratorium could be raised as a defense, and the evictions just weren't going forward. That process is now sped up. So what options are available now after the moratorium has been lifted to tenants that might be behind on their rent in Mississippi?
Unfortunately, from a strictly legal standpoint, I think those options are very limited now. Because as I may have mentioned before, in Mississippi, there's no legally recognized excuse for not paying rent when it's due. Now, having said that, landlords can certainly tenants rather, can get with their landlords and attempt some sort of workout whereby the landlord will essentially stay his hand and not pursue the court or the legal proceeding. In Mississippi, what I do is, especially when I have a landlord-tenant situation, usually it's about a 3 to 4 week time period between the time that the landlord files that affidavit and starts the whole process to the time it actually gets on the docket for a hearing. I generally, if a tenant just will call in to the court clerk and say, hey, I got this process, I can't make it. I won't even ask them a question. I'll give them one free continuance. So if you're a tenant in Mississippi in that situation, don't ignore that process. Reach out to the court, ask for additional time. I mean, a lot of judges were sensitive to the fact that this is a person who may be about to be put out on the street. No caring, decent person wants to do that to anybody else. I don't. I am very generous, very liberal, and most of the justice court judges in Mississippi are also. to give tenants a little more time. Maybe they've just gone through a period where their earnings were depressed, really going to get back on track. So, that's always a possibility, just to participate in the process enough to get yourself some extra time. Now, obviously, that depends on the landlord being willing to go that route. And if the landlord's not willing to go that route, then Brad, what you were just saying about going through the bankruptcy process, in particular, Chapter 13, is probably going to be, in Mississippi, your best bet to stay that eviction, longer, or as long as we could do it under the bankruptcy code.
So I want to underscore what Ed Woods just said, folks. You've got to be proactive. Don't just sit back with your head in the sand. If you want to proceed in justice court, don't ignore that summons. Don't ignore that notice from your landlord. Respond, ask for a hearing, ask for a continuance if you need some time to get things in place. But you have certain rights, and you can extend the period of time that you're going to be within the property that you're renting. And if bankruptcy is something that you want to consider, certainly reach out to one of our offices, but do it quickly, because there's only a short window of time in which you can stay the eviction proceedings. And I also want to talk, though, I know the federal government has made rent relief money available to the states. And I know in Alabama, at least now, that money is flowing pretty well. And it's been a great benefit, not only to tenants, but landlords are applying for that money because the money is intended. It's not so much intended to help, or not solely intended just to help renters. It's intended to put money into the economy. So landlords should be helping their tenants to apply for this rent relief money. Mm-hmm. What can you tell me about how that money is being used in Mississippi right now?
I think, unfortunately, and I guess we could go on and on about this, but unfortunately, I don't know whether landlords just were kind of deer in the headlights, so to speak, when all of this happened, and didn't fully investigate their rights to get federal money. I don't think, quite frankly, that a whole lot of landlords in Mississippi did that. Now, let me say this. From the very beginning of the CDC moratorium, the one we're talking about that just expired, that dates back to September of last year. And so in a couple of my continuing judicial education seminars that I also have to attend, we heard from an attorney in Jackson who was representing larger landlords statewide, and he was lamenting the fact that it appeared that landlords were not seeking that kind of compensation. And so, I don't think that it has been utilized nearly as much in Mississippi. If hearing that attorney that's representing those commercial landlords, or representing groups and landlord association groups.
Well, I certainly want to speak to landlords. If your tenants are behind, there are millions of dollars worth of money available to help tenants who are behind. And again, that money is not just for the tenants. It needs to be applied for by the landlord and tenant together. And that money is intended to help you as landlords also by allowing you to keep operating your business, your property. So reach out, inquire, reach out to elected officials, reach out to state officials, and find out where that money is and how it can be accessed. It's important. And I learned something interesting. I've practiced law in Alabama, and of course, as you know, I'm licensed in Mississippi too, but I've been practicing law in Alabama since 1986, long time. And I learned from Holly Ray that the courts in Alabama have the ability to seal the records concerning the eviction proceeding if it's requested, so that, if the tenant has just had some situation where they're behind by a little bit, they can't pay their rent, they're being evicted, that record is sealed so it won't impact them when they look to rent somewhere else. Is there anything similar in Mississippi?
Not to my knowledge. Our proceedings, like virtually everywhere else in Mississippi, are subject to public records requests, and generally considered public records to begin with. Really, the only court in Mississippi that I know of that has that level of protection is going to be the court that deals with juvenile justice issues. So I'm pretty sure there's nothing like that in Mississippi. That's interesting. That's very interesting.
I'd encourage you. Holly Ray shared with us that she actually wrote the brief that's been used throughout the state of Alabama, and she cited a decision that was made concerning one of our former governors in Alabama and how his domestic records were sealed, and courts have found that as grounds to help people that may be behind on their rent.
I suspect if that might be a way. In other words, I believe a chancellor in Mississippi, for sure, if we were going to have something like that, or if that kind of request was made, you might be able to go that route. But as far as just a broad statutory right, I am not aware of anything like that in Mississippi. I've never, other than juvenile justice courts, our courts have always operated out in the open.
I'm gonna get you a copy of that brief just so you
I'd
can
love to
look
see
at
it.
it.
I'd love to see it.
Both in your capacity as a judge and
Yeah.
with Bond and Bodis representing
Yeah.
people that are behind on their rent. So, Ed, let's talk about from a bankruptcy perspective. Somebody comes to see you in your capacity as an attorney here at Bond and Bodis. They're behind on their rent, and they've received a notice tacked on their door yesterday that they're behind on their rent. They've got 3 days to cure it. What can you do at Bond and Bodis as an attorney on their behalf?
Well, there's a couple things we can do. When that happens, and it does happen, first thing I need to find out about is who the landlord is. If it's somebody that I know, or perhaps know the lawyer that represents that landlord, maybe a call or an email to that lawyer saying, "Hey, I'm representing Mr. Jones, and he's behind on his rent. We know he's behind on his rent. We're working with him, so I might be able to buy some time, so to speak, doing that." The other thing is if they bring me a summons and I look at it and I see that, hey, this is coming up in a couple of weeks, sometimes I'll get them to call and request a continuance. A lot of times I won't do that. I'll just tell them, hey, call the clerk's office and say this. And they'll do it and get a continuance that way. That gives us a little bit more time to assess the situation. A lot of times, folks that are having that kind of problem need a bankruptcy petition, either a Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 petition, for lots of other reasons. Maybe they're behind on a car and those kinds of things. So that gives us a little bit more time. We can, I don't know if you guys are doing this much in Alabama, but over here, our bankruptcy judges don't really like this, but we can file what's called an emergency petition. And essentially that is just kind of the first few pages of a bankruptcy petition to invoke the automatic stay, the protection. And then, the courts generally give us about 14 days to come back in and finish filing the case, the schedules and all of that. We've done that before. But I will say this, regardless of, what avenue you take, generally speaking, but being behind on the rent is not something that can be, put off for a great deal of time. I mean, you need to get on it. We need to either try to deal with the landlord, file a bankruptcy petition, request hearings, request continuances, because it is a time-sensitive matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to emphasize, bankruptcy should never be your first option, but if you're facing an eviction and you need to protect your home for your family, it may be the only option that you have. We'll certainly try to talk to the landlord. We'll certainly talk to you about other options, but bankruptcy may be the only option you have to keep your family in your home for a longer period of time. As I said earlier, though, you need to act quickly, because once that judgment of eviction is entered, the bankruptcy stay will no longer slow down the proceedings, will no longer keep you in your home any longer. But when you're being sued for an eviction, keep in mind that the landlord is not only suing just to move you out of the property, but the landlord's also suing to collect back rent. And as Ed well pointed out, if you're behind on your rent, you may have other financial issues. We don't want you, on top of everything else, facing a garnishment down the line. So even if it's too late to stop the eviction from moving forward, you may want to consult with one of us about bankruptcy options to deal with the financial, the back rent, the unpaid rent, and any other legal obligations you may have. So to our viewers, I'm going to talk for just a little bit here, and then we're going to come back to Ed, and Ed's going to be available to answer questions. I've had some questions come in, Ed, that I'm going to give you a chance to answer. Okay. But I want all of our viewers, just to recap things. My name is Brad Bodis. My guest is Ed Woods. We're both attorneys with the Bond and Bodis Law Offices. Ed manages all of our offices in Mississippi. We're in Jackson. We're in Vicksburg. We're in Hattiesburg. But we essentially represent people throughout the state right now, because just about everything is being done virtually. Court hearings, just about everything in the bankruptcy process is being done virtually. And I like to tell people, in the 30 plus years I've been doing this, it's the first time somebody can file a bankruptcy from start to finish without ever leaving their couch.
I would have never predicted it, Brad.
We're in different times.
Yep.
But folks, whether it's an eviction, whether it's a potential foreclosure, and the moratorium on foreclosures is also going away, if you're behind on car payments and worried about a possible repossession, if you're worried about a wage garnishment, all of these are issues that can be addressed by a good, competent attorney. At the Bond and Bodis Law Offices, we've been helping people with financial problems for over 30 years. We treat our clients like family. If you come to see one of us, you're going to talk to an attorney one-on-one directly. Your conversation is confidential, and we're just going to answer your questions and make some suggestions. There's no cost and there's no obligation, but the consultation is important so that you know what your options are. Folks, I know what the anxiety of dealing with financial issues or the inability to pay your bills is like. It can create stress. It can create sleepless nights. It can create marital problems. Folks, it's just not worth it. There are options available. The law provides options for you, and we can explain those to you so you at least know what your options are. There's nothing going to be done by just having that conversation other than you'll know your rights. We'll talk to you about whether or not we can keep you in your apartment or keep your home. We'll talk to you about how we can help you keep your car and perhaps reduce the monthly payments. We'll talk to you about how to stop a wage garnishment, but nothing moves forward until you say, Mr. Woods, Brad, this is what I want to do. I want to move forward with this. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we can help you with, there's certainly no charge for the initial consultation. And a lot of times we can get the bankruptcy process started without any money up front. So please reach out to us for help. You are viewing the weekly Bond and Bodis Facebook Live. We have focused last week and this week on the end of the eviction moratorium, the temporary moratorium that was put in place by the CDC was found unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court just a few weeks back. So evictions have started back up in Alabama and Mississippi, where our offices are located. In last week's episode, we focused on the eviction process in Alabama. Had an excellent guest, Holly Ray, who is the managing attorney with Legal Services Alabama in their Huntsville office. Just provided some great information on how the process works in Alabama, what defenses you may have available, rent relief programs that may be available. Those that episode is available on our Facebook page, and it's also available at the Bond and Botus website. We encourage you, if you or someone you know or care about is facing an issue with unpaid rent or potential eviction in Alabama, to view that episode. This week, we're focusing on evictions in Mississippi, and my good friend and partner, Ed Woods, who's joining us today, has served for a couple of decades now as a justice court judge in Mississippi. He's also represented individuals for a long, long time who are unable to pay their bills. And Ed just gave a great overview of how the eviction process works in Mississippi, at what points you can act to protect your rights, how you can buy yourself more time in your apartment or in the home you're renting or mobile home you're renting. So the information shared was just invaluable. I encourage you to share it with anyone that may be impacted by these type issues. The Bond and Botus law offices, again, are located throughout Alabama and Mississippi, and we're offering absolutely free initial consultations. So at this point in our show, we go to questions from our viewers, and we've had some questions come in, Ed, and I'm going to give you a chance to address these. So the first question is one I get a lot. What if my landlord filed an eviction against me while the moratorium was in effect and got a court order evicting me? So the order was entered and that moratorium was in effect. Do I have any rights right now? This person wants to know.
That's a great question. In Mississippi, if the eviction was filed during the moratorium period, and we haven't talked about this, the rule did require that tenants make, you might say, a brief showing that they, didn't have any other options, that they weren't able to pay their rent because their job was COVID impacted or whatever. I'm sure there were some instances in my court. There were some instances, I guess, everywhere where during the moratorium, eviction filed, tenant did not comply with the rule. Now, this the tenant, the person being evicted, did not comply with the rule, which meant that the court could proceed with an eviction. So if that process went through that way, unless you're within a time period where you could appeal, which is generally 30 days, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. Now, if the order, if the eviction was filed and the order was stayed, then I think you're as long as the landlord hasn't been back to court after the expiration of the moratorium, I think you're still okay. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to pay rent. You have to pay rent, and by the time the landlord gets back to court, that rent may be 5 months worth of rent or more. So you may be faced with a huge amount, but that would be, I think, how it would go here. So
to this viewer, it's yet another instance where you need to act on your own. If you're served with an eviction, whether it was during the moratorium or now the moratorium has been found unconstitutional, you've got to speak up. You have to raise the moratorium as a defense. If for some reason an eviction was filed and you or another tenant didn't raise the moratorium as a defense, didn't go into court and say, look, I've been affected by COVID, I can't pay my rent, the moratorium protects me, then a judge may have ordered the eviction, and it's probably too late to do much about it at this point.
Yep.
I still encourage you, though, to reach out to one of our offices, because in addition to facing being removed from your home, you don't want to be garnished for that unpaid rent at some point in the future.
And I think that's the big danger there. Yes, you may have lost your right to possession, but you still have that money judgment there that can hurt you if you don't deal with it.
Right. Next question. After an order evicting me, what can I do? What if I don't have another place to go?
Well, you can always ask for an appeal in justice court. I would strongly suggest that if you're in that position, that you immediately get some help with an appeal from justice court. It's not terribly difficult, and any general practice lawyer can read the rule and follow it, but there are some rules that you need to follow. And if you can get the order appealed, generally you can hold on to possession of the premises a little bit longer, and you're going to get a brand new hearing in the so-called appeals court by a brand new judge who's going to look at the case anew. So appeal rights there would be extremely important. Or like we were saying earlier, maybe you can seek some bankruptcy relief, even though we know the automatic stay doesn't apply after the eviction order. I don't know, Brad, in some instances, I haven't tried this in Mississippi, but as you and I know, bankruptcy judges can stay proceedings through other means under the bankruptcy code, and not just the normal automatic stay. But all of that is going to require some quick legal work. That is not a do-it-yourself situation at all.
Ed, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, folks, there are going to be a lot of evictions in the months to come, and there are going to be a lot of foreclosure proceedings because these moratoriums that have existed against evictions and against foreclosures have been lifted or will be lifted very shortly. And unfortunately, and this really worries me as someone who's represented consumers for decades, I'm afraid there are going to be a lot of folks that won't have a place to live. You'll find families living together. But I've got to keep repeating myself. There are protections available if you raise them early. Please, if there's any chance you're facing eviction, if there's any chance you're facing a foreclosure, give us a call. Give us a call. It's free. You'll talk to an experienced attorney with Bond & Bodis, and we'll do it over the phone or by video, however you're comfortable. Let us explain your rights before the eviction or before the foreclosure so we can keep you in your home for as long as possible. We're not going to do anything that you don't want done. People think that they're necessarily going to lose their home, lose their property if they seek bankruptcy protection. I can tell you, folks, and you can view our other episodes where we've gone into more detail about the different types of bankruptcy, but we're not going to let that happen to you. We're going to take care of you, and you're going to know what your options are moving forward. But you've got to reach out for help. Absolutely. Call the number on your screen, visit our website, gather more information. We have a form you can fill out on our website, and we'll reach out to you. But please talk to one of our attorneys and be proactive, folks. All right, so next question, Ed. I'm behind on my rent now, but my landlord has not taken me to court yet. What are my rights?
Here's what I would tell people on that. I've always been a proponent of people trying to work their disputes out.
Absolutely.
A lot of times with a kind word or with a gesture to your landlord, where you're saying, listen, I am not trying to say that I'm not behind on rent, and I'm not trying to say that you're not entitled to your rent. I get it. But, I lost my job to COVID, or my spouse lost his job due to COVID. We're getting back on our feet. Can we pay you an extra $50 a month for the next several months or something? I mean, there is never a time when that is unlikely to be helpful. Now, the landlord can certainly say no. I want my rent or I want possession. They have the legal right to say that. But if you're in that spot, I don't see a downside to at least reaching out to your landlord and trying to reach an amicable solution to the problem. All right. And then if you do that and it doesn't work, it's time to talk to an attorney. That's what we were saying. If you've been watching this the last several months, get in touch with competent legal counsel, because if you're in that period, you don't know exactly when the landlord's going to run down to justice court and file his affidavit, and off you go. So again, to reiterate and reiterate what Brad's been saying, please don't sit on this stuff. Reach out. If the landlord is not going to be nice to you or rude to you or won't agree with you, okay, I get it. But we can do something about it if they want. And I think that's I've told people that many times before. A lot of times people come to us behind on rent, but they got a whole lot of other issues too. We're going to file a case for them anyway. But let's just pretend this is a person who's got everything else under control and it's just the rent is the last thing they're trying to do. Reach out to the landlord, okay? Reach out. They'll either say yes or no. If they say yes, you'll work it out. If they say no, get some help.
I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, Ed. And this doesn't just apply to a landlord-tenant situation. And I'm speaking to both folks that are unable to pay their bills and those that may be trying to collect, unpaid rent from a tenant, or somebody that might be behind on another payment. Scripture tells us, if you've got a quarrel with somebody, if you think somebody's done you wrong, first go talk to that individual. Folks, I'm going to help you if you can't get it worked out on your own. As an attorney, I'm going to offer you whatever help the laws will allow. But always first try to work things out. Like so much else, if you just open up a dialogue and talk to one another, you can get things worked out. So please try to do that first, but know that we're here and know that you need to act quickly. If you're behind on your rent, at least give us a call so you know what your options are. All right, so next question. What if my landlord did get, it says government money, so I assume they meant rent relief money during the moratorium. Can I still be evicted now?
Well, I know during the moratorium period, and if I remember that rule correctly, the landlords could get into quite a bit of trouble if they took money, rent relief money, so to speak, and then decided they were going to also try to collect from the tenant. Now that was all part of that rule. The Supreme Court's ruled it unconstitutional, and I'm no constitutional scholar, but I remember from con law in law school that if a statute's ruled unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional from the start. The next thing I would say is that if the landlord did receive rent, let's say you suspect that the landlord did get some rental assistance, then it's all a question of did that amount of money that the landlord received get you up to date on your rent? If it did, the landlord no longer has a right to evict you. Yeah. Your current, even though it didn't come from you, it was paid on your behalf and you're current. So I would certainly say this. If somebody comes to my court, I've never had it so far, and says, hey, listen, I know I'm here. He's saying I don't, I'm behind $2,000 on rent, but I'm pretty sure he got $2,000 worth of money. So I'm going to, the landlord's going to have to respond to that allegation.
Yeah. And it sounds like rent relief programs may be just a little bit more active in Alabama than in Mississippi. Having said that, if you're in Mississippi and you're behind on your rent, or if you're a landlord, the money's there. It's been made available by the federal government, so try to pursue it. But the way most of these programs, or all of them, the rent relief programs work that I know of, is that both the landlord and the tenant have to work together to seek the money. So if the landlord asks for the money, the tenant needs to be involved. So there should be some way to pin down whether or not that money was used to catch up your rent. It's not going to take care of current rent payments, and it's not going to take care of payments that weren't made.
Right.
So you're going to need to do a little bit of work there, and you may need an attorney's assistance. And again, we'll be glad to help you if you're in that position. Just reach out to us using the phone number that's available here on the screen, or go to our website and arrange for a free consultation. Ed, we're running a little bit short, but I want to see if any of these other questions may be important here. Here's a good one that I'll add into. What's the best way to contact either Ed or Brad if I need help? And I'm going to speak to this.
Okay.
I have, but at the bottom of the screen right now, you have a number that will allow you, if you call that number, we'll set up an initial consultation with you with one of our attorneys in our location that's most convenient to you. Or if you go to our website, bondandbotus.com, you may want to gather a little bit more information. There is an abundance of information, blog posts, videos, quite a bit of information on the different ways that we can help you. And then you can complete a form there at our website and request a consultation, and we'll reach out to you and help get that set up. But folks, these are tough times. They're really tough times. We've been through things over the last year and a half that I just never dreamt we'd be through. Ed, you and I have been friends for a long, long time. We've practiced law, and we thought we'd seen everything.
Yeah.
But this last year has been different, folks, and we know a lot of you have had financial problems. You may not have been able to work. You may not have been able to run your business if you're a small business owner. You may be behind on your rent. You may be behind on your mortgage payments right now. Now's the time to reach out to help. We want to help you. That's why we're offering absolutely free initial consultations. As I said earlier, first try to work, with your landlord. If you're a landlord, try to work with your tenants, see if you can't get the issue resolved without getting attorneys involved. But if that doesn't work, give us a call. I can assure you that we're going to treat you just like we would one of our family members if they called and wanted to know what to do. We're going to let you know what your options are. We're not going to charge you at all for that initial consultation where we go over your situation with you. The laws, whether they be bankruptcy or outside of bankruptcy, are not the same for everybody. They impact everyone differently based upon your situation, and we want to help you. Ed, I know all of our folks in Mississippi have been working hard to try to help people. Is there anything you might want to add with respect to what's going on in Mississippi right now and how we can be of assistance to people?
I would just expand on what you're saying. If you're listening to this broadcast now or you're watching it later, and you're having rent problems, eviction problems, or any other types of financial problems that are keeping you up at night or causing stress and strain in your family or turmoil in your family, please. I know, Brad, I know you guys are doing this in Alabama. We're doing this in Mississippi. If you call us, if an attorney is available right then to get on the line with you, if I'm available right then to get on the line with you and you're calling my office, you will hear from me, okay? Because we realize that these have been very trying times and that people are very stressed out. And they don't need help next week. A lot of times they need help now. Yeah. And so please just reach out. And if I'm not available to talk to you on the phone right then, they're going to tell you when I'm available, and I'm going to be calling you back. And it's usually the same day.
Yeah. Ed, thank you for those additional words. It's on my heart right now. I want to speak specifically, if you're experiencing marital problems because of unpaid bills right now, if you see your spouse sleep, not reacting to situations that come up properly because of the stress they're under, reach out together, talk to us together, but do it together. We want you to have a happy family. We want you to get your finances under control, and we want to help you come up with a plan. Ed, thank you so much for joining us today. Ed Woods is one of the best attorneys in Mississippi. I don't know if I can get away with all of this with the disclaimers we're supposed to put as attorneys, but I can tell you, nobody's going to be concerned more about you or try harder to help you than Ed Woods and the rest of our staff in Mississippi, and with all of our attorneys in Alabama. At Bond and Botus, as you see on your screen right now, faith, family finances are things that are very important to us. Until next week, so long, and God bless all of you. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Brad.